The conference room smelled like recycled air and collective nervousness. Lena Carter sat 3 rows from the back, clutching her coffee cup with both hands, watching it shake despite her best efforts to stay still. Emergency all-hands meetings didn't happen often at Stone Industries. When they did, someone usually got fired. She knew exactly why they were here. Daniel Stone stood at the front of the room in his usual perfect suit, face unreadable, hands clasped behind his back. The entire company, 200 people, crammed into a space meant for 150, had gone silent the moment he'd walked in. "There's been gossip," he said, voice cutting through the quiet like a blade through butter, "about a personal text message." Lena's stomach dropped to somewhere around her ankles. "The message was sent to me by mistake." His eyes scanned the room, not landing on anyone in particular, but somehow making everyone feel seen. "Anyone caught spreading rumors about this matter, or any private matter, will face immediate termination. This is not a warning. This is policy, effective immediately." He paused. The silence became somehow louder. "Dismissed." For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then, someone's phone buzzed, and the entire room flinched like they'd been shocked. People started standing, gathering bags, whispering behind hands. Under the table, Janet from accounting squeezed Lena's hand. Lena squeezed back, because if she let go, she might actually dissolve into the floor tiles, and that seemed unprofessional. The hallway erupted the moment they were out of the conference room. Not loud gossip, no one was that stupid, but the kind of aggressive whispering that sounded like a broken radiator. Lena made it exactly 12 steps before pivoting hard toward the women's bathroom. She locked herself in the farthest stall, sat down fully clothed on the toilet seat, and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Lena." He shut down the gossip in a company meeting. "Mom, did you check the recipient this time? Despite everything, despite the fact that her career might be over, despite the fact that 200 people now knew something had happened, even if they didn't know exactly what?" Lena laughed. Just a little, a slightly hysterical exhale through her nose. "Lena, Mom. Mom, just checking, honey. Mom, are you okay?" Lena stared at that question for a long moment. Was she okay? She'd accidentally texted, "I miss you, Mom," to the CEO of the company. He'd received it, read it, said nothing for 3 days while gossip spread like a grease fire, and then called a meeting where he'd essentially threatened to fire anyone who talked about it. "Lena, I don't know yet. Mom, that's honest. I'm proud of you for showing up today." "Lena, I didn't have a choice. Running away to Alaska seemed extreme." "Mom, Alaska has excellent Wi-Fi these days, but you'd miss me." "Lena, yeah, I would." She sat there for another minute, reading and rereading her mom's messages until her breathing steadied enough that she felt like she could stand without her knees giving out. 3 hours later, Lena forced herself to get coffee. The alternative was falling asleep at her desk, and that seemed like it would generate new and exciting gossip. The break room was mercifully empty except for Marcus from a different floor. Supply chain, maybe, she couldn't remember. He was pouring terrible burnt coffee into a mug that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." "That was intense today," he said, not looking at her. "Yeah." And Lena focused very hard on adding sugar to her coffee. 1 packet, 2 packets, a third, because today seemed like a 3-sugar day. "For what it's worth," Marcus said, dumping an inadvisable amount of creamer into his mug, "I don't care who texts who, I just want to know if they're ever going to refill the good coffee pods. This tastes like tire rubber." Lena almost smiled. "I think they discontinued the hazelnut ones." That's a tragedy." He took a sip, made a face. "Well, hang in there." "You too," Lena said, though she wasn't sure what he was hanging in there from. Maybe just life, maybe the terrible coffee. He left. She stood there alone, holding her too sweet coffee, and realized that some people were going to be kind about this. Not everyone, but some. It was a small comfort, but she'd take it. 3 days earlier, Lena's alarm had gone off at 6:47 a.m. like it did every weekday, and she'd hit snooze. At 6:56 it went off again, snooze. At 7:05 she finally dragged herself out of bed, stumbled to the kitchen, and started the coffee maker while still half asleep. The apartment was quiet, except for the gurgle of the machine and the distant sound of someone's car alarm going off in the parking lot. She made it halfway through her first cup before noticing she was wearing 2 different socks. One black, one navy blue. Close enough that most people wouldn't notice, far enough that she definitely looked like someone who'd gotten dressed in the dark. She considered changing them, decided against it. Champions made tough choices. Granola bar for breakfast, keys, bag, phone. Out the door by 7:43. It was going to be a completely ordinary day. By 10 a.m., Lena was deep in the quarterly marketing report, the kind of work that made her both competent and slowly lose her will to live. She was good at this, catching data inconsistencies, reorganizing information so it actually made sense, making boring numbers tell a story. The problem was that being good at it meant she got to do more of it, which meant late nights, which meant the dark circles under her eyes were becoming a permanent feature. "You look exhausted," Janet said, leaning against the cubicle wall with her own coffee. "I look productive," Lena countered, not looking up from her spreadsheet. Both can be true, a revolutionary concept. Lena saved her work, stretched, her neck cracked in 3 places. "How's the expense report situation?" "Slowly killing me. Someone tried to expense a llama." "A llama?" "A full llama, for team-building purposes." Janet shook her head. "I love this job. I hate this job." And also both can be true," Lena said. And they smiled at each other with the weary solidarity of people who chose to pay rent by sitting in fluorescent boxes all day. At 6:47 p.m., Lena was packing up her desk, laptop in bag, coffee mug to the break room sink, phone in hand when it buzzed. "Mom, are you still coming this weekend?" Lena smiled at her phone, typing with one hand while trying to zip her bag with the other. "Lena, I miss you, Mom." Her phone rang. She grabbed for it, hit send with her thumb while reaching, didn't notice. Just grabbed her bag and headed for the door. It was Thursday. She was tired. She had leftover pasta at home, and a video call with her mom later. Just a normal day. At home, Lena made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce and some vegetables she threw in to feel like an adult, and called her mom while the water boiled. "How's the garden?" Lena asked, wedging the phone between her shoulder and ear while stirring. "The tomatoes are trying to take over the world. I'm letting them. How's work?" "Busy. We've got the investor presentation coming up, and I'm doing materials for it, so I've been staying late." "Are they paying you overtime for that?" "Mom, I'm salaried." "Doesn't mean they should take advantage." And Lena smiled, dumping pasta into the water. "I know, but it's good experience, and honestly, I kind of like it. Making things look good, making sure everything's right." You always did care about getting things right," her mom said, warmth in her voice. "Even when you were little, you'd redo your homework 3 times if it wasn't perfect." "That's called anxiety, Mom. That's called caring, honey." They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Her mom's book club, Lena's coworker who kept stealing people's lunch from the fridge, whether or not Lena should get bangs again. "Absolutely not," her mom said firmly. And it was comfortable, easy, normal. "I should let you eat," her mom said finally. "Love you, sweetheart." "Love you too, Mom." Lena ate her pasta alone at her kitchen counter, scrolling through social media, thinking about nothing in particular. At 9:23 p.m., she was getting ready for bed when she checked her phone one last time, and her blood turned to ice water. The message thread was there, clear as anything. "I miss you, Mom," sent to Daniel Stone's CEO. Delivered, 6:47 p.m. Read, 7:15 p.m. No response. Lena sat down on her kitchen floor, still holding her phone, and stared at the screen. "Oh no," she said to her empty apartment. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she called her mom back. Her mom answered on the second ring, concerned. "Honey, what's wrong?" "Mom," Lena said, voice tight, "I did something really bad." 2 weeks before the text incident, Daniel Stone had been in the elevator, heading to a board meeting, when someone from marketing got in on the 3rd floor. She was young, mid to late 20s maybe, clutching a folder to her chest like it was a shield. She'd pressed the button for the 5th floor, then immediately made herself small in the corner, eyes fixed on the floor numbers like they were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Daniel had noticed she seemed nervous, stressed, maybe. There was something in the way she was holding herself, tense shoulders, too tight grip on that folder, that made him think she was having a difficult day. He'd wanted to ask if she was all right. But how did you do that without sounding inappropriate, without making her more uncomfortable? The elevator dinged. She hurried out without a word. Daniel had watched her go, felt mildly concerned for approximately 30 seconds, and then forgotten about it entirely because he had a board meeting, and board meetings required his full attention. On the day Lena sent the text, Daniel's morning had been exactly the same as every other morning for the past 3 years. Alarm at 6 a.m., shower, black coffee, no sugar, financial news on his tablet while eating toast that he didn't really taste. Dressed in a suit that cost more than some people's monthly rent, every detail precise. His assistant Sarah had arrived at 7:30, letting herself into his office with her own key and her own enormous travel mug of coffee. "Morning, Mr. Personality," she'd said, dropping her bag on her desk. "Good morning, Sarah." She'd grinned at him. This was their routine. She teased him for being impossibly formal. He continued being impossibly formal. It had worked for 3 years, and he saw no reason to change it. "Board meeting at 10, she'd reminded him. "Jenkins is going to push back on the Q4 projections again." Jenkins always pushes back on the Q4 projections. "Yeah, but this time he's got data." And she'd handed him a folder. "I put together a counter-analysis. You're welcome." "Thank you, Sarah." You're buying me lunch for this. I'm paying you well for this. Yeah, but I like the free lunch too. She'd headed back to her desk. Also, you have leftover schmooze on your collar from dry cleaning. Fix it. That he'd fixed it. The board meeting had gone exactly as expected. Daniel presented the quarterly projections, growth steady, margins acceptable, some concerns about supply chain, but nothing they couldn't manage. He spoke clearly, concisely, backed every claim with data. Jenkins, predictably, had questioned the Q4 forecast. These numbers seem optimistic given current market volatility. Daniel had pulled up Sarah's counter-analysis without missing a beat. If you look at our historical performance during similar periods, you'll see we actually tend to outperform in volatile markets due to our diversified client base. The data supports the projection. Jenkins had nodded slowly. Fair point. The meeting had ended 20 minutes early. The board members had filed out, several of them stopping to shake Daniel's hand, to tell him good work, keep it up, he was good at this part, the numbers part, the strategy part, the part where competence mattered more than charm. It was everything else he struggled with. After the meeting, a junior executive, Jenkins's assistant maybe, had tried to make small talk in the elevator. Nice weather today, sir. Daniel, making a genuine attempt at casual conversation. Yes, the weather is quite appropriate for business operations. Silence. The kind of silence where you could actually hear someone's soul leaving their body. The elevator had dinged. The junior executive had practically run out. Daniel had stood there, genuinely confused about what he'd said wrong. The weather was appropriate. That was a factual statement. Later, Sarah had appeared in his doorway with her arms crossed. You told Jenkins the weather was appropriate for business operations? It was. That's not how humans talk, boss. It was accurate. Sarah had sighed. The sigh of someone who'd been sighing this same sigh for 3 years. You're exhausting. But she'd said it fondly. That was how Daniel knew they were actually friends. Despite the fact that he paid her salary, she was allowed to tell him when he was being weird, and he was allowed to be weird anyway. That's why I pay you well, he'd said. You pay me well to translate human. She'd pointed at him. But I can't be in every elevator with you. You're going to have to figure some of this out on your own. Noted. Not actually noted. You're going to do it again tomorrow. Probably. She'd laughed, shaking her head, and gone back to her desk. That evening, Daniel had been reviewing contracts in his office. The building mostly empty, just him and the janitorial staff and a few other people who'd apparently chosen work over having lives. When his phone had buzzed, text message, he'd glanced at it. From Lena Carter, marketing analyst, 3rd floor. Message. I miss you, Mom. He'd stared at it, read it again, read it a 3rd time. Obviously a mistake. She'd meant to send that to her mother and had somehow sent it to him instead. It happened. Technology was fallible. But wasn't she the nervous woman from the elevator 2 weeks ago? The one who'd looked so stressed? Was she okay? Should he ask? No, that would be weird. Intrusive. Should he respond to acknowledge the mistake? No, that would make it more embarrassing for her. Should he just delete it and pretend it never happened? Maybe. Daniel had sat there for 5 full minutes, staring at his phone, completely paralyzed by the simple question of what the appropriate response was to someone accidentally texting you a message meant for their mother. In the end, he'd done nothing, just set his phone down and gone back to his contracts. But he'd thought about it, more than he probably should have. The next morning, Lena had arrived at work at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than usual, specifically to avoid running into people. She'd made it exactly 3 steps into the building before encountering Marcus from supply chain, who'd given her a cheerful wave. Then she'd seen 2 people from her floor having coffee in the lobby, and both of them had looked at her just a fraction of a second too long. Was she being paranoid? Probably. Did that make the feeling go away? Absolutely not. She'd gotten to her desk, turned on her computer, and stared at her email inbox like it held the secrets of the universe. At 8:15, she'd pulled Janet aside. I need advice. Janet had immediately looked concerned. What happened? I accidentally texted the CEO. You what? I was texting my mom. I said I miss you, Mom, with a heart emoji. I sent it to Daniel Stone instead. Janet's eyes had gone very wide. Oh my God. What did he say? Nothing. That's almost worse. Lena had run her hands through her hair. What do I do? Do I apologize? Do I pretend it didn't happen? Do I change my name and move to Alaska? Okay. Janet had grabbed her shoulders. Let me talk to Mark. He works in executive relations. Maybe he knows what the protocol is for this kind of thing. There's a protocol for accidentally telling your CEO you miss him. There's a protocol for everything in corporate America, Lena. It had seemed like a good idea at the time. At noon, Janet had found Mark in the cafeteria and pulled him aside. Hypothetically, she'd said, if someone accidentally sent a personal text to an executive, what's the proper way to apologize? Mark had set down his sandwich. How personal. I miss you, Mom, with a heart emoji. To which executive? Hypothetically, the CEO. Mark had blinked. Then he'd picked up his sandwich again, taken a bite, and thought about it while chewing. Let me ask my manager, he'd said finally. She might know if there's a formal communication error protocol. He'd meant well. He really had. But when he'd gone to his manager's office and said, hey, quick question about communication error protocol regarding personal messages to executives, his manager had been in a meeting with two other department heads. And she'd said, loudly enough for them to hear, what kind of personal message? Mark had tried to be vague. Just, a message that was meant for family but went to the wrong person. Which executive? Does it matter? Mark, the CEO. The two department heads had immediately looked at each other. And that was how it started. By 3 p.m., 3 people knew. By 5 p.m., it was floor-wide. By the time Lena left work that day, walking quickly with her head down, she could feel the weight of people's stares following her to the elevator. The next morning, Lena had been on her way to the supply room when the elevator doors had opened. Daniel Stone was inside, alone. Every instinct in Lena's body had screamed, abort, abort mission, take the stairs, fake your own death. But her body, the traitor, had already stepped forward. The doors closed. They were alone in a small metal box, and Lena's brain was making a sound like a tea kettle reaching critical pressure. She'd stared at the floor numbers like they were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. First floor, second floor. Please go faster. Please develop the ability to teleport. Good morning, Ms. Carter. Her soul had left her body. Good morning, sir. Silence. The kind of silence that had physical weight. Third floor, fourth floor. Come on, come on, come on. Your quarterly report was very thorough. Lena's brain had short-circuited. He was complimenting her work? Right now? In this elevator? After she'd accidentally told him she missed him? Thank you, sir. More silence. Fifth floor, sixth floor. The elevator had dinged. The doors opened. Lena had walked out with the careful dignity of someone who desperately wanted to run, but refused to give in to the urge. She'd made it approximately 10 steps before ducking into the nearest bathroom and texting her mom. Lena, I just had the most awkward elevator ride of my life. Mom, with the CEO. Lena, he complimented my work. Mom, that's nice. Lena, it was terrifying. Sarah had been at her desk when Daniel returned from wherever he'd been, and she'd immediately known something was wrong because he had the face. The face was what Sarah called the expression Daniel got when he'd attempted human interaction, and it had gone poorly. You look disturbed, she'd said. I attempted casual conversation in the elevator. It was unsuccessful. With who? Lena Carter, marketing analyst. Sarah's eyes had lit up with the particular glee of someone who'd just been handed premium-grade gossip. The one who... Wait, you saw the text? It was clearly a mistake. Obviously, but you saw it. Yes, and you didn't respond. I didn't know what would be appropriate. Sarah had leaned back in her chair, studying him. So you said nothing for 3 days, and then you tried to make small talk in an elevator. I complimented her work. After 3 days of radio silence following an embarrassing text. Yes. Boss, I love you, but you are terrible at this. I'm aware. Sarah had tried very hard not to smile. Failed. Did she seem okay? Daniel had thought about it. She seemed like she wanted the elevator to develop a teleportation function. Yeah, that tracks. That afternoon, Lena had been in the bathroom, again, because apparently hiding in bathrooms was her new primary coping mechanism. When 2 women had come in, she'd been in the stall, so they hadn't seen her. Did you hear? One of them had said. Someone texted Stone, I miss you. No way. Who? That girl from marketing, Lena something. Oh my God, what did he do? Probably reported her to HR. Can you imagine? Lena had sat there, frozen, listening to them talk about her like she was a piece of office gossip and not an actual person who could hear them. They'd left eventually. She'd stayed in the stall for another 5 minutes, trying to remember how to breathe normally. When she'd finally come out, she'd texted her mom. Lena, I might need to quit my job. Mom. Over a text? Honey, breathe. Mom, you're going to be okay. Lena had wanted to believe her. She really had. But standing there in the bathroom, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, pale, tired, wearing 2 different socks under her professional slacks, she wasn't sure she believed anything anymore. 3 days after the meeting, a strange new quiet had settled over the office. People had stopped gossiping, or at least they'd stopped doing it where anyone could hear, The fear of Daniel's termination policy had done its job, but in place of gossip, there was now a weird, over-careful politeness whenever anyone interacted with Lena. "Good morning," her cube neighbor had said too brightly. "Morning," Lena had replied. "How are you?" "Fine." "Great, that's great." And then silence. It was like walking on ice. Everyone was being so careful not to slip, not to say the wrong thing, that all conversations felt stiff and strange. Lena hated it more than she'd hated the actual gossip. At least gossip had felt real. A week after the meeting, Daniel had sent her an email. From Daniel Stone to Lena Carter, subject updated marketing guidelines, Ms. Carter, please review the attached updated marketing guidelines and provide feedback by end of week. Your attention to detail on the quarterly report suggests you'll catch any inconsistencies. Regards. Daniel Stone. Lena had stared at this email for a full minute. It was work, just work. A completely professional request. But he'd never emailed her directly before. Usually requests came through her manager. And the part about her attention to detail, was that just a normal compliment? Or was he checking on her? From Lena Carter to Daniel Stone. Subject, re-updated marketing guidelines, Mr. Stone, I'll review the guidelines and send feedback by Thursday. Best, Lena Carter. She'd agonized over whether to say best or regards or thank you for approximately 10 minutes before just hitting send. His response had come 3 minutes later. Thank you. That was it. Just thank you. Lena had no idea what to do with that. The following Wednesday, Lena had been getting coffee, her third cup of the day, which was probably inadvisable but also necessary, when Daniel had appeared at the coffee machine. This was unusual. Sarah usually brought him coffee. He almost never came to the break room himself. They'd both reached for the sugar dispenser at the same time. Their hands had almost touched. Both had pulled back like they'd been shocked. Sorry, Lena had said. No, please, Daniel had said, gesturing to the sugar. Lena had taken the sugar, added it to her coffee, stirred. Daniel had taken the sugar after her, added it to his coffee. From across the break room, Sarah, who had apparently followed Daniel and was now watching this entire interaction with barely concealed amusement, had shaken her head slowly. Later, Lena would realize that Daniel didn't take sugar in his coffee. Later, she would wonder why he'd taken it anyway. But in the moment, she just grabbed her coffee and left, heart doing weird things in her chest. 2 days later, Lena had been eating lunch in the small park outside the building, partly because it was a nice day, mostly because she needed to escape the weird energy of the office. She'd been halfway through her sandwich when she'd noticed someone sitting on a bench about 20 feet away. Daniel Stone, alone, in a park, on a Friday lunch hour. Their eyes had met. There was no pretending they hadn't seen each other. He'd nodded. She'd nodded back. And then, instead of leaving, instead of the awkward dance of avoidance they'd been doing, he'd just stayed there, on his bench, eating what looked like a very sad desk salad. Lena had stayed too, on her bench, eating her sandwich. They didn't talk, didn't sit together, just existed in the same space, about 20 feet apart, eating lunch. And somehow, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet, peaceful almost. When Lena had finished her sandwich and stood to go, Daniel had nodded again. She'd nodded back. Neither of them had said a word. The next day, Sarah had appeared in Daniel's office doorway with her arms crossed and a knowing look on her face. I see you've discovered the third-floor coffee machine. Daniel had looked up from his work. It's closer to the East Conference Room. Mm-hmm. And the park? Fresh air is beneficial to productivity. Right. And the fact that Lena Carter eats lunch there every day is purely coincidental. Sarah, I'm just making observations, boss. Your observations are unnecessary. My observations are fascinating, she'd grinned. You like her. I respect her work ethic. When you took sugar in your coffee, you hate sugar. I was being polite. You were being weird. Oh, she'd laughed. It's kind of adorable, actually. Daniel had given her a look that suggested this conversation was over. Sarah had ignored it completely. Just don't do the thing where you try to solve her problems with CEO powers. That never goes well. Noted. Not actually noted. You're going to do it anyway. She'd left. Daniel had sat there, staring at his computer screen, not actually seeing it. Sarah was right, of course. She usually was. That night, Lena had been on the phone with her mom, painting her nails and trying to pretend her life was normal. He keeps appearing, she'd said, phone wedged between shoulder and ear while she did her left hand. Not in a creepy way, just there. Maybe he's being friendly, her mom had said. He's the CEO, Mom. He doesn't do friendly, he does efficient. So he's efficiently being nice to you? Lena had paused, mid-brush stroke. I guess. Honey, are you interested in him? What? No, that would be, no. That was a lot of no's. Because it's a lot of no, Mom. Her mom had made a humming sound that meant she didn't believe that for a second, but she was gonna let it go for now. Just be careful, okay? I don't want you to get hurt. Well, I know, Mom. But also, if you do like him, that's okay too. You're allowed to like people. Even my boss's boss's boss? Life is complicated, sweetheart. Lena had looked down at her half-painted nails, thought about Daniel in the park eating his sad salad, thought about the way he'd taken sugar in his coffee even though he clearly didn't want it. Yeah, she'd said quietly. It really is. A few days later, Lena had been working at her desk when her instant message had pinged. Janet, coffee? Lena, always. They'd met in the break room. Janet had already poured 2 cups by the time Lena arrived. So, Janet had said, handing Lena a mug, you and the CEO seem cordial. We're professional. You had lunch in the park together. We had lunch in the park near each other. That's different. Is it, though? Lena had taken a long sip of coffee. Yes, very different. Completely different. Legally distinct? Janet had laughed. Okay, but real talk, do you like him? It doesn't matter if I like him. That's not a no. It's the situation is complicated, and I'm trying not to think about it. Janet had studied her for a moment. You know what I think? What? I think you already know you like him. You're just scared. Lena had opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Because Janet was right. She was terrified. 2 weeks after the meeting, Daniel had been passing by Lena's office after a late afternoon meeting. When he'd noticed her light was still on, he'd paused at her door. She'd been hunched over her desk, typing furiously, completely absorbed in whatever she was working on. He'd knocked lightly. She'd looked up, startled. Miss Carter, a moment? She'd immediately looked nervous. Of course. He'd stepped into her office, barely an office, really, more of a large cubicle with a door, and suddenly felt very aware of how small the space was. I wanted to say, he'd paused, which was unusual for him. He didn't usually hesitate. Your work on the investor materials was exceptional. You anticipated questions I hadn't considered. Lena had blinked, surprised. Oh, thank you. I care about getting it right. I know. Beat. Say that again? Lena had looked confused. Say what again? That you care about getting it right. He'd looked at her differently. Most people say they care about success, recognition, advancement. You said getting it right. He'd let that sit between them for a moment. It's refreshing. Lena hadn't known what to do with her face. I guess I do care. About the work being good, not just looking good. Daniel had nodded slowly. Something had shifted in how he saw her, or maybe in his willingness to admit how he'd been seeing her all along. Thank you for clarifying, he'd said, and left. Lena had sat there in her small office, heart doing very strange and complicated things, wondering what exactly had just happened. 3 weeks after the meeting, Lena had been called into her manager's office and given what was technically good news. We'd like you to help prep for the investor dinner next month, her manager had said. It's high profile. Multiple firms. Good opportunity to showcase your work. That's great, Lena had said and meant it. Mr. Stone will be presenting, of course. Along with the executive team, you'll be supporting from the background. Of course, her manager had smiled. This is a good sign, Lena. People are noticing your work. Lena had walked back to her desk, told herself this was purely professional, that she could absolutely handle working on something where Daniel would be presenting, that this was just work and nothing else. She'd almost believed it. 2 weeks before the dinner, Lena had been at her desk until nearly 9 p.m., working on the presentation materials, graphs, data visualizations, making sure every number told the right story. She'd been so absorbed she hadn't heard footsteps in the hallway. You're here late. She'd jumped. Daniel was standing in her doorway, briefcase in hand, clearly on his way out. Big presentation, she'd said. Wants to make sure everything's perfect. Don't overwork. She'd smiled despite herself. Says the man I've seen here at midnight. That's different. How? He'd opened his mouth, closed it again. Apparently had no answer, almost smiled. Point taken. Good night, Mr. Stone. Good night, Mrs. Carter. He'd left. Lena had sat there, staring at her computer screen, trying to remember what she'd been working on. The investor dinner had been exactly as stressful as she'd anticipated. Lena had spent the first hour making sure all the materials were in place, that the presentation loaded correctly, that backup copies existed. By the time the investors arrived, she'd checked everything 3 times. The presentation had gone smoothly. Daniel had been impressive, sharp, confident, handling questions with the kind of ease that came from truly knowing your material. Lena had watched from the back of the room, barely breathing, waiting for something to go wrong, Nothing had gone wrong. After several investors had complimented the data visualizations, one had asked specific questions about the methodology. Lena had answered clearly, professionally, and watched them nod in approval. Daniel had caught her eye across the room, nodded. She'd nodded back. "Well done, Ms. Carter." She'd glowed from that praise the entire rest of the evening. There had been a moment, brief, probably nothing, where they'd held eye contact just a fraction too long, where the air had felt different, and then someone had interrupted, asking Daniel about quarterly forecasts, and the moment had passed. Later, Lena had escaped to the bathroom to collect herself. She'd been washing her hands when two women had come in. Investor wives, from the look of their jewelry. "That young woman," one had said, touching up her lipstick. "The one with the data presentation. Is she involved with Daniel Stone?" Lena had frozen. "I don't know," the other had replied, but he couldn't stop looking at her. Interesting." They'd left. Lena had stood there, hands still wet, staring at her reflection. He couldn't stop looking at her? She'd thought she'd been professional. Thought she'd been careful. Apparently not careful enough. The next day, Lena had told Janet everything over emergency coffee. "So people think you're dating the CEO," Janet had said, practical as always. "Could be worse." "How?" "They could think you're bad at your job." Lena had laughed, but it had sounded hollow even to her own ears. Janet had caught it. "Hey, you okay?" "I'm just tired of being a topic of conversation, you know? Like, I did good work. I worked really hard on that presentation. And people are talking about whether or not I'm sleeping with the CEO instead of talking about the actual work." "People are garbage," Janet had said firmly. "Your work was excellent. Everyone who matters knows that." "Yeah. You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, just tired." Janet had squeezed her hand. "Hang in there." Lena had tried. She really had. A week after the investor dinner, Lena had gotten an email from HR asking if she had time for a quick chat. The chat had been scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in one of the small conference rooms that smelled like old coffee and vague anxiety. Two people from HR had been there, both smiling, both very professional. "We're just checking in with team members to ensure everyone's comfortable in their working environment," one had said. Lena had known immediately what this was about. "I'm comfortable," she'd said. "Good. And you feel you're being treated fairly? No concerns about favoritism or inappropriate attention?" "Everything's been professional." They'd smiled, written something down. "Good. We just want to make sure." Sometimes when there's perception of a relationship between team members at different levels, it can create uncomfortable situations. There's no relationship. Of course. We're just doing our due diligence. The meeting had ended 10 minutes later. Lena had walked back to her desk, feeling like she'd been interrogated for a crime she hadn't committed. Someone had complained. Someone had thought she was getting special treatment because of Daniel, and now HR was involved. That afternoon, Lena had made a decision. She'd started avoiding the third-floor coffee machine, started taking different routes through the building, started eating lunch at her desk instead of the park. Every email to Daniel became meticulously professional, every interaction documented, every word chosen carefully. She was protecting herself the only way she knew how. By the end of the week, Daniel had noticed. Lena wasn't at the coffee machine anymore, wasn't in the park. Her emails were brief, formal, with none of the small personal touches they'd developed. The occasional, "hope you're having a good day," or "thanks for your patience." Just facts, just work. He'd asked Sarah about it on Friday afternoon. Did something happen? Sarah had looked up from her computer. With who? Lena Carter. You mean besides you making everything weird? I didn't make anything weird. Boss, you've been finding excuses to run into her for 3 weeks. People notice these things. Daniel had felt something cold settle in his stomach. People? People. And did someone, complain to HR? Probably. Sarah had leaned back in her chair. She's protecting her job. From you. The realization had hit him like cold water. He'd been trying to be kind, to check on her, to acknowledge good work, and all he'd done was put a target on her back. That night, Lena had been at home, stress baking cookies at 11 p.m. because apparently that was her life now. Her mom had called. "Why are you awake?" "Baking." At 11? What happened?" Lena had mixed the dough more aggressively than strictly necessary. "I'm avoiding someone at work by becoming nocturnal." Does this someone deserve good cookies?" Lena had looked at the cookies, paused. No, she'd eaten one anyway. "They're really good, though." Her mom had laughed gently. "Honey, are you okay?" "I'm making terrible decisions at midnight, but the cookies are great, so..." Mixed results. They'd both laughed, And for a moment, Lena had felt almost normal. Monday morning, Sarah had brought Daniel his coffee and set it down harder than necessary. You look terrible. I made things worse. For who? Someone who didn't deserve it. Sarah had sat down. So fix it. I don't know how. She'd been quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. Well, stop doing the things that make it worse. Start there. She'd tapped his desk. You're good at solving problems, but some problems aren't puzzles, they're people. She'd left him with that. Daniel had sat there staring at his coffee. It was exactly how he liked it. Black, no sugar. Sarah had been making his coffee for 3 years. She knew exactly how he took it. Some things you couldn't fix, you could only know them. He wondered if anyone would ever know him well enough to make his coffee without asking. He wondered if he'd ruined any chance of that. 2 days later, Lena had been at her desk when her email had pinged. Company-wide message from Daniel Stone. Subject, company policy reminder. Merit-based advancement team. I want to reiterate our commitment to merit-based advancement and equal treatment of all employees, regardless of personal relationships or perceptions thereof. All promotion decisions are made by committee, with documented justification based on performance metrics. Lena had read it twice, closed her laptop, put her head in her hands. He'd been trying to help. She knew that. He'd been trying to make it clear that she wasn't getting special treatment, that her work stood on its own. But all he'd done was confirm to the entire company that there was a situation worth addressing. Now everyone knew. That evening, Lena had gone to Daniel's office. After hours, when most people had left, when she could have this conversation without an audience, she'd knocked. He'd looked up, surprised. Ms. Carter, you need to stop. He'd stood. Stop what? Helping. Every time you try to help, it gets worse. I was trying to... I know you were trying to protect me, but you can't fix this. Her voice had been steady, which had surprised her. You're the CEO. I'm not. That's the problem. Every time you defend me, every time you email me, every time people see us together, it makes it worse. Daniel had looked like she'd physically hit him. I apologize. I didn't mean to... I know you didn't. But intent doesn't matter. Impact does. Silence. So what do you want me to do? Nothing. I want you to do nothing. She'd taken a breath. I need to handle this on my own. I need people to see my work, not your protection. Understood. She'd turned to leave. Ms. Carter. She'd paused. For what it's worth, your work has always stood on its own. I hope you know that. Oh, I do, she'd said quietly. But I need everyone else to know it too. She'd left. Daniel had stood there in his empty office, feeling more alone than he had in years. Daniel had spent the weekend thinking. He'd sat in his apartment, expensive, immaculate, everything in its place, and realized something uncomfortable. His instinct, always, was to solve things with authority. Employee problem, policy change, performance issue, clear directive. Interpersonal conflict, meeting, established ground rules, done. But he couldn't solve this with authority. Because authority was the problem. He couldn't protect Lena from the power imbalance. He was the power imbalance. Every time he tried to make things better, he'd made them worse. Every time he'd used his position to shield her, he'd drawn more attention to her. He'd thought he was being kind, helpful. He'd been selfish, trying to make himself feel better while making her situation worse. Monday morning, he'd sent Sarah home early and sat alone in his office, staring at nothing. Lena had spent Sunday on the phone with her mom. What do you want? Her mom had asked. Gentle, but direct. I want it to be fair. But it's not. So what do you actually want? Lena had been quiet for a long time. I don't know. Yes, you do. You're just scared to say it. More silence. I wanted the park, Lena had said finally, quietly. I wanted the coffee machine encounters. I wanted the way he looked at me when I explained my work. I wanted the maybe something. And now? Now I want my job. I want my career. I want people to respect my work. Can't you have both? Not with him, Mom. Not while he's CEO and I'm me. Her mom had made a soft sound. Understanding. Sad. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Yeah, me too. Wednesday afternoon, Lena had been at her desk when Daniel had appeared, not at her office. At the coffee shop down the street, he'd texted her first, which was new. Mr. Stone. Would you be willing to meet off-site? I'd like to talk. Lena. When? Mr. Stone. Now, if possible. The coffee shop on 5th Street. She'd grabbed her bag and gone. He'd already been there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees. She'd sat down across from him. I can't make this equal, he'd said without preamble. I've been thinking about it all weekend, and I can't make this equal. I don't know how. I know. And if there were a way, but there isn't. Not while you're CEO and I'm me. They'd both been quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he'd said, for making things harder. That was never my intention, but that doesn't change the impact. I know. You deserve better than this situation. We both do. He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, and she'd seen something in his face. Regret, maybe, or recognition. I wish things were different, he'd said quietly. Yeah, me too. They'd sat in silence for a while. Their coffees had gone cold. Later, walking back to the office separately, because even this conversation had to be careful, Lena had thought about all the things she hadn't said, that she could transfer departments, that he could recuse himself from anything involving her, that there were workarounds if they wanted them, but workarounds were bandages, and the wound was structural. Sometimes caring about someone wasn't enough. Sometimes the circumstances just won. Monday morning, Lena had been at her desk when a coworker had stopped by. Can you explain the new software update? I'm completely lost. Lena had explained it, patiently, step by step. Then she'd helped someone fix the printer. Then she'd gotten lunch, turkey sandwich, same as always. Sat at her desk, eating, scrolling through news. Life continued, work happened, printers jammed, software needed explaining, sandwiches needed eating. Her heart was a mess, but her hands still worked, her brain still functioned. There was a small dignity in that. She wasn't destroyed, wasn't broken, just sad. And okay with being sad for now. They'd parted ways at that coffee shop with a simple understanding. Daniel had said, I'll see you at work. Lena had said, yeah, at work. Both had known what that meant. Professional distance, proper boundaries, separate elevators, no more park lunches. The thing that had started with a wrong text ended with nothing dramatic. No grand gesture, no tearful goodbye, just two people going back to their places in an office building. Sometimes that's how things ended. Not with an explosion, with a quiet agreement, with adult sadness. 2 months later, Lena had gotten coffee from the third-floor break room. Not avoiding it anymore, just existing in the same space as everyone else. Daniel had been there, also getting coffee. They'd settled into a rhythm by then, polite, professional, with a tiny warmth underneath that neither acknowledged but both felt. Good morning. Morning. They'd both gotten their coffee, made brief eye contact, smiled, small and real, didn't avoid each other, didn't seek each other out, just coexisted. It was enough. Not what they'd wanted, but enough. 3 weeks later, Lena had gotten promoted. Different department, better title, more responsibility. Daniel hadn't been on the selection committee. He'd recused himself. She'd earned it. The email had come through at 2 p.m. She'd stared at it for a full minute, then called her mom. I got promoted? Honey, that's wonderful. I know. I'm really happy. You sound surprised. I am, a little. I worked hard for it, but I didn't think. She'd paused. I didn't think people would see the work, just the situation. But they did. Yeah, they did. At 4 p.m., she'd gotten an email from Daniel. Subject, congratulations, Miss Carter, congratulations on your promotion. Well deserved. Regards, Daniel Stone. She'd written back, Mr. Stone, thank you, best, Lena Carter. She'd meant it. Sarah had appeared in Daniel's office that afternoon. You're different lately. He'd looked up. How so? Quieter, not bad quiet, just thoughtful. I learned something. What? That I can't fix everything. Some things just are. Sarah had studied him for a moment. That's very mature of you. Don't sound so surprised. I'm a little surprised. She'd smiled, but proud. After she'd left, Daniel had sat there thinking about that, about being okay with not fixing things, about letting things be complicated and uncertain and not tied up in a neat bow. It was harder than running a company, but maybe more important. 2 weeks later, Lena's mom had visited for the weekend. Over coffee Saturday morning, she'd asked, so what happened with that CEO situation? We're fine, just different now. Different how? Professional, cordial. We say good morning. Sometimes we talk about work. Lena had paused. It's okay. Do you regret it? Any of it? Lena had thought about that for a long time. I regret that it couldn't work, but not that it happened. Her mom had squeezed her hand. That's very wise. I learned it from you. They'd sat there in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the morning. 3 months after the coffee shop conversation, Lena and Daniel had ended up in an elevator together. There were other people there, all very professional, all pretending not to notice the CEO and the newly promoted manager in the same space. The elevator stopped. People got off. One more floor, just the two of them. Daniel had spoken first. You're doing well in the new role. Thank you. Lena had smiled. You're still terrible at small talk. He'd almost laughed. Actually almost laughed. I know. The elevator dinged. They'd both gotten off, gone their separate ways. but they'd both been smiling. It wasn't what they'd wanted, not the maybe something they'd been building toward, but it was real and honest, and sometimes that was enough. 6 months after the text, Lena had been at her desk, working on a campaign proposal. She'd been good at her job before. She was better now, more confident, more willing to trust her instincts. Life wasn't perfect, her career wasn't perfect, her heart wasn't perfectly healed, but she was okay. Content, maybe. At 5:30, she'd packed up her things, grabbed her bag, pulled out her phone. Lena, coming for dinner Sunday? Mom, always, love you. Lena, love you too, Mom. She'd checked the recipient, smiled, sent it. That evening, as Lena was leaving, she'd passed by the executive floor on her way to the parking garage. Through the glass walls, she'd seen Daniel at his desk, talking to someone on the phone. He'd looked up, seen her, brief eye contact, tiny nod. She'd nodded back. Both had returned to what they were doing. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back, shown two people in a building full of people. Their story hadn't ended perfectly, but it had ended honestly. Some connections didn't get resolution, just truth. Some stories didn't need perfect endings, just real ones. A small thought to sit with this story as a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Here's the thing about wrong texts and missed chances. They're not really about the text or the chance at all. They're about the distance between what we want and what's actually possible. About caring for someone in a world that doesn't always make space for that caring. About doing the right thing, when the right thing means letting go. Lena learned to check her recipients. That's the easy part. The harder part was learning that sometimes you can do everything right. Work hard, be honest, care deeply, and still not get the ending you wanted. Not because you failed, just because circumstances win sometimes. Daniel learned that authority can't solve every problem. Sometimes it creates them. They both learned that you can care about someone and still choose distance. That maturity isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, quiet decisions to protect someone else's career, dignity, future. Even when it costs you something you wanted, the text was a mistake. The caring wasn't. And maybe that's enough. To have cared honestly, to have been seen clearly, to have made the hard choice together. Not every story gets a say it again moment that leads to forever. Some just get truth and honesty, and two people learning to coexist with grace. In the end, Lena still checks her recipients. She still gets coffee from the third floor. She still sees Daniel in elevators sometimes. They still nod. It's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes something real is better than everything perfect.